Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part one of my journey to Ungoro card review. 4 new cards were revealed with the announcement of the brand new expansion. Seems like it's going to be a while until we get more card reveals, so these are going to have to tide you over for a couple weeks. But I didn't want to delay. I wanted to go ahead and jump into these cards and start talking about all the fun new stuff that appears to be on the way with Journey to Ungoro. So that said, let's go ahead and jump into the first card, which also introduces a new keyword, a brand new mechanic to Hearthstone, which is the Quest mechanic. This card is a priest 1-mana spell called Awaken the Makers, and it's a quest, which means essentially you cast this spell. A new secret type icon is developed on your hero portrait. It looks like a secret, but it's a different shape. It's like an oval teardrop shape instead of just the normal circle, and it's visible to both you and your opponent. And essentially that quest is now tracked throughout the course of the game, and you have to meet a condition in order to complete or fulfill that quest. So for instance, with Awaken the Makers, this priest card, throughout the course of the game you have to summon 7 Death Rattle minions, and upon summoning your 7th Death Rattle minion, you receive a reward. A new card is added to your hand, and that card is Amara, the Warden of Hope, and you can see Amara right here on the right side of the screen. So Amara is amazing. She is frankly one of the best Hearthstone cards ever created. She's 5 mana. She's an 8/8 taunt. That's already a playable card. That's ridiculous. That's awesome, right? That's a 5 mana Ironbark Protector. That's really, really good. But her battle cry is even more absurd. You set your hero's health to 40. So not only is she Reno Jackson that can take you from 1 health back up to 30 health, a full heal, she even adds 10 more health on top of that. So it's like she's giving you 10 armor to work with as well. So that has a lot of applications. First and foremost is that Reno heal. It's just going to be a really big heal that gets you out of tight spots, particularly since she's also a really defensively bodied taunt minion. So if your opponent's playing really aggressive, not only do they have to now deal with an 8/8 taunt, which right there could be enough to help you survive, but now they also have to work through 39, up to 39 extra points of health, which is absolutely absurd. Another helpful benefit of this is that decks that rely on burst damage, things like Malagos with a bunch of cheap spells, burning you for really, really high damage, doing something like 30 damage in a single turn, suddenly that won't be enough if you have a 40 health hero. So even if you're going from a full health 30 up to 40, that could still be advantageous against the right kinds of decks if they're looking to burn you down from really high totals, things like Freeze Mage or Malagos, multiple variations. So that's nice. It's just giving you that extra health total, much like we've seen with Warrior in the past. Can really do a lot just by having a ton of health. So that also helps in fatigue scenarios where you just need more health to work with. Can help you go toe-to-toe with Control Priest versus Control Warrior, whereas in the past, Control Warrior always had that advantage because they could just build up so much health and survive farther into fatigue. So this gives you a little bit more of a competitive edge there, which is nice. And finally, another interesting little benefit here that most people probably haven't thought about yet is that Molten Giant suddenly gets a little bit better. The problem with Molten Giant when it got nerfed was that you have to get to such a low health total that by the time you can play your Molten Giant for free, you're probably just dead because you only have 5 health, I think it is at this point. But adding 10 health back means you can kind of play your free Molten Giants at a more reasonably safe health total like you could in the past. And it was made really popular with things like Handlock back in the day. So who knows, maybe Amara, Warden of Hope, single-handedly revives Molten Giants. I think that's a pretty small benefit of this card, but an interesting little interaction that is added when your opponent gets additional health, assuming it works like it should, and it actually factors in 40 health as your base, not 30 still. If that's the case, then it wouldn't affect Molten Giant at all. But regardless of all that, those are the applications of this card. Really, the essence of it is that if you get this off, if you're able to pull off the quest, if you're able to satisfy the conditions of the quest, if you get those 7 Death Rattle minions off, Amara, Warden of Hope, is absolutely ridiculously good, particularly against aggro. So she's like a super Reno Jackson. I think it's theoretically possible to play her on turn 5. The way quests work, they do show up in your mulligan. So you can choose to keep it, or you can choose to toss it back, but it's always going to be in your mulligan. So it's very reliably playable on turn 1. And just depending on how many Death Rattle minions you have in the ensuing turns, I guess if you had the coin, for instance, you'd get 4 total cards, one of which is this quest. You could have 3 Death Rattles. They're like 1 drop, 1 drop, 2 drop, and you drew a 3 drop, 4 drop, 5 drop, etc. I think you could theoretically get to 7 Death Rattle minions. If not by turn 5, then certainly by turn 6, I think. So this could be that sort of mid-game Reno Jackson life-saving play, but only if your deck was built very specifically to play Death Rattle minions. So, as soon as you drew a spell, say you drew Power Word Shield, that might throw off your curve and might delay you by a turn. If you draw that Shadow Word Pain, that's not a Death Rattle minion that you have to play. So it pushes back your Amara a turn or 2. But still, even on turn 7 or 8, there's a lot of instances where this will be a game-saving play. Not only is it a huge tempo play from the standpoint of a huge body for its cost, but that health just gives you a whole nother, 5-6 turns worth of life. So you'll be able to stabilize in the ways that Priest can do, the various ways Priest has to stabilize. So it feels to me like it's a really fantastic card. Even outside of aggro, even in control or mid-range matchups, this feels really good because you're going to have the time to get those Death Rattle minions off. It's not really a sacrifice to play Death Rattle minions. Often they're very good, high-value cards anyway, so it's not like you're giving up a bunch. And then just eventually, just throughout the course of the game, because you're playing Death Rattles anyway, you're going to get this awesome bomb of a card that just helps you win the game, right? It's just ultimately useful whether you're at 30 health or 1, and the body alone would be worth it. So just a nice high-value card that seems to fit any kind of matchup. And it's going to require a specific kind of deck, obviously, but a thing like N'Zoth Priest already has had some rumblings in the past. Apparently it's very good in wild format as well. So you could certainly see this being utilized in N'Zoth Priest very effectively with all the Death Rattle minions, building just a really high Death Rattle synergy deck. So I like this a lot. On a higher level, on a more macro, broader level, quests seem pretty cool. I think this is a really fun mechanic. It gives you a different kind of way to play, a different thing to think about. They really encourage the style of deck building that they want. So I think these are the kinds of cards that are going to make Hearthstone a little bit more unique, give classes a firmer identity to play off of, and I think it'll be healthy for the meta. So as long as they're good, as long as they're balanced, as long as they have enough time to work, which that's really going to be the test here, is if you can get 7 Death Rattle minions off consistently enough to matter, then quests seem like a really neat new mechanic. And also, it's worth noting that this is a legendary spell for the very first time. We've never had legendary spells before. So quests appear to be the new legendary spell, and that does not mean, by the way, that you won't be getting another class legendary in Unguro. It's been confirmed by Blizzard that, in fact, you're going to get 2 class legendaries in Unguro. Well, you'll have to buy them or craft them or get them out of packs, but theoretically each class is going to have 2 as long as you get them. So the normal minion plus these new quests, the 1-mana spells, and these also have interactions as spells, even though they're unique. And in fact, the original graphic shown in the announcement video showed sort of the legendary dragon on the corner of the card. That's not visible here, I'm not sure why, but regardless, they do still operate as spells. So this is going to work really cool with stuff like Gadgetzan Auctioneer, or setting up combos for Rogue, or just whatever you need. It has all the same kind of implications that a normal spell would. Alright, so now that we've talked about Awaken the Makers, let's go ahead and move on to another legendary card. This time it's a Mage minion by the name of Pyros, a 2-mana 2/2. It's an elemental, which I guess we should talk about that first. So there's a new tribal affiliation being added to the game, Elemental. This is one, but also it's going to be added retroactively to all the Elemental cards. So things like the Magma Ragers, the Ragnaros, the Alakir, basically anything that's an Elemental from Warcraft lore will now be an Elemental. I don't yet know what that means, other than it's just a new tribe, so there will certainly be some synergy cards, but we haven't seen any yet. But who knows? It's going to be like the new mech, because mech, is long gone. But who knows what exactly it means? It's just something to keep an eye out for, particularly with things like Mage and Shaman. Mage has stuff like the water elemental. Shaman has a ton of different elementals. So it looks like those are going to be the two classes, I think, that dominate the elemental keyword. But up first is Pyros, and this is a 2-mana 2/2. It's got a death rattle. When he dies, he returns a 6/6 mana, or a 6/6 version of this card that costs 6 mana back to your hand. So you can actually see that here. We've got the 6 mana 6/6 Pyros, which also has a death rattle when it dies. Then you get a 10 mana 10/10 Pyros. So pretty interesting. A lot of, I guess, value packed into a single card. In other words, you're getting 3 cards out of 1 card in your deck list. So things like Kabbalist Tome do that currently. It turns 1 card into 3 cards or 2 additional cards. This is that same kind of idea. It's a really grindy type card that if you're in long games that are really resource oriented, you're just getting extra bodies without taking up an additional slot in your deck. So there's just more raw power, more total stuff to play. And that can have an advantage in really control style matchups where your opponent is scraping together removal and trying to find resources for every card you play. And that's theoretically the idea here that makes this card reasonably good. Unfortunately, that's not really a playstyle that Hearthstone has seen a lot of lately, frankly, ever. I mean, there have been some grinder mages that are successful. Reno Mage obviously is an archetype that's popular today, but it gets by on being more about removal and answering than producing really grindy threats like this. If you played a 6 mana 6/6 Death Rattle in the current meta, where it didn't actually do anything active to the board, it was just basically a Boulder Fist Ogre or a bad Boulder Fist Ogre, your opponents would just ignore it and run over your face and kill you. So this is not a card like Sylvanas, which can actually impact the board a little bit and do things and steal minions and cause some friction. This is the kind of card that's really delayed in its effect. So you have to spend 2 mana, then you got to wait 4 turns to get the benefit out of the Death Rattle, and even then you're playing just a standard body, and you got to wait 4 more turns to get the benefit out of the Death Rattle, and even then it's just a 10 mana 10/10 that doesn't even have taunt or anything significant about it. So it's just a very, very slow card. It's going to require specific kinds of matchups to work at all, and frankly, I don't think it's going to be played or going to be good. I guess in a N'Zoth style deck, it could get even extra value because you're going to get so many minions back in your hand. But again, I don't know that that's necessarily good or viable in Hearthstone. We're going to have to see how the meta shapes up, but most likely I think that's going to be a failure of design here. If this card had Taunt, I think it'd be slightly better just because you'd be getting more Taunt minions that your opponent would have to react to. Just big Taunt bodies can be better than big bodies that don't otherwise do anything. So, unfortunately for me, Pyros feels like a pretty hard pass as far as a playable card. Just not a lot to do here. Not fast enough, not active enough, not reactive enough. Just a really passive minion that's very slow in the value that it offers. So moving on to the next card. It's a Shaman spell, Volcano. 5 mana spell here. It deals 15 damage, randomly split among all minions. Now that means all friendly and enemy minions, so you can kill your own stuff here. This is basically the maddest of all bombers. If you're thinking about Mad Bomber and Madder Bomber, it's the same kind of effect. In other words, it's just totally random, pings whatever is available on the board. Of course, there's no minion attached to this one, but it does 15 total damage, which is crazy. It does also have 2 overloads. It's really kind of a 7 cost card in total if you'd like to think about it that way. So the first comparison that comes to mind for me is a card like Flame Strike, right? It's a 7 mana board clear. Of course, Flame Strike though does up to, I guess, theoretically 7 times 4 damage, so 28 damage if the opponent had a full board. Often probably more like 12 to 16 damage for 3 to 4 minions, which looks better already, right? Like Flame Strike has a higher total output as far as damage is concerned. Of course, Flame Strike is far less flexible. In other words, if your opponent has 2 5 health minions, Flame Strike doesn't kill either one. So that's sort of useless. But Volcano would actually kill both, because it would be 10 total health on the board, and this card would be able to take out both minions. So that flexibility is actually kind of intriguing. Clearly there's some downsides because you can kill your own stuff, And Shaman is a pretty board-centric class in general. They like to have minions out. They've always got stuff like their totems out. So it seems like it's pretty risky, the symmetrical nature of this, just because you're likely to kill your own stuff. Now, elemental destruction cards like that have already dealt with that in some ways. Shamans have built around that by having really late game oriented cards and just making sure they have enough clears. So this card is theoretically playable in that kind of environment or that kind of deck. I don't see it fitting into the more typical Shaman decks that we see dominate the ladder currently. So this card feels like sort of an in-betweener to me. I'm not sure it's really great in either scenario, but the design is not fundamentally broken. I think there's cool scenarios where this could kill a 15 health Cthulhu and be a single target removal card, or it could kill 5 3 health minions that your opponent has played, turning it into sort of a pseudo flame strike that's able to be played 2 turns earlier. So I like that idea. I like that aspect of it. Who knows if Volcano might actually be playable. One thing's for sure, if you've seen the animation for this card, which was in the announcement trailer, it's really, really cool, well-designed animation. It looked fantastic. So it's going to be fun to see regardless if it's viable or not. But I have a feeling this card will occasionally be played. I just don't think it's going to feel oppressive or dominant or overpowered in any sort of way. So that said, let's go ahead and move on to, I think here, the final card for part 1 of my Journey to Un'Goro review. This is the Verdant Longneck, a new Druid minion. It's a dinosaur, which I love. 5 mana, 5/4 minion. Dinosaurs are also beasts, as you can see. So I have a feeling hunters and druids are going to like some of the dinos available here in Journey to Un'Goro. And the interesting part about this card is another new keyword called Adapt. So Adapt is essentially another Discover effect. So you'll get 3 choices that pop up on the screen, and they'll each affect this minion in a different way. And there are 10 total adaptations that are going to be possible. So in other words, from the 10 total available ones, you'll get 3 randomly selected that you can choose from. And here are the 6 adaptations on the top that have already been revealed. So your minion could get +3 attack. You could choose to give it +3 attack. You could choose to give it Wind Fury. You could choose to give it to the effect that can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. You could choose to give it Taunt. You can choose to give it Divine Shield. Or you could pick a Death Rattle that summons 2 1/1 plants. Now, only 6 of the 10 have been revealed at the time of recording this video. I've kind of thought about what the other ones could be. I suspect Stealth is a pretty obvious choice. That wouldn't be unbalanced. I think Health also makes sense, but I think it's less likely to get 3 health than it is 2, just because health can be a little bit more oppressive than damage, because damage can still be taken away if an opponent, if a minion is killed by an opponent. Health makes it harder to kill, so I think it would be more balanced to see 2 health. I think some sort of enrage effect, like if this minion takes damage, gain 5 attack or something. I don't know what it'd be, because you already have +3 attack, and if it wasn't balanced higher than +3 attack, there'd be no reason to ever choose the enrage. So I suspect some kind of enrage. It's just going through the keywords, basically. And I think a charge effect, too, but I don't think it'll be charge face. I think it'll be restricted to charge minions. This can charge minions, because Blizzard has been really reluctant to give charge to things, and just giving a blanket to a keyword like this can be scary, because already like a 5 mana 5/4 charge is pretty good. It'd be better than something like Druid of the Claw. So I don't know what other adapt minions are out there, but it feels like if charge was a part of this set, then adapt would have to be really restricted as a keyword. So I think if they limited it to it can charge other minions, that would feel much more balanced and fair. So those first 6, the more white colored ones, are the confirmed ones. The 4 below that with the question marks are my theoretical ones. I don't know yet exactly what they're going to be, but those are some ideas and some suggestions that make sense to me. That said, as far as this particular card is concerned, it's a 5 mana 5/4. That's not particularly exciting, but a 5 mana 5/4 with Divine Shield is suddenly a pretty good card. 5 mana 5/4 that can't be targeted by spells or hero powers, probably not a bad card. 5 mana 5/4 with Wind Fury, fairly okay card. Wind Fury is not always great because you don't have Wind Fury on defense, but in the right scenario, Wind Fury could be decent. An 8/4 for 5 mana, which was the +3 attack option, not a bad card. Susceptible to death, but still a very big threat. Overstated essentially for its cost. And a 5/4 with a Death Rattle 2/1/1's pretty solid card. That's, you know, nice little Death Rattle minion. So these are effects that make this card feel okay. A beast with any of these different effects could actually be really solid and playable, particularly in a beast-style Druid deck, which this certainly seems to be another card that encourages, and Blizzard has been trying to make work for a very, very long time. None of these feel like a totally overpowered card. I mean, a 5/4 with Divine Shield is really good, but it's not absolutely crazy. But that's not really the point. I don't think the individual effect has to be amazing for this card to be playable. It's the fact that you get to choose. It's the fact that there's flexibility. It's the fact that you have control over it that makes it so good. In other words, you know, if you're playing a Shaman and you're expecting them to have Jade Lightning in hand and you play a 5-mana 5/4, usually it's just going to die to their efficient spell and they're going to summon a Jade Golem. But what if you give it Divine Shield? Suddenly their Jade Lightning is almost useless because they don't have a ping effect. That could be really, really powerful. And in fact, I think Divine Shield on average will probably be the strongest of all of these keywords. So I think you'll be excited to see Divine Shield. But what if they had a 1/1 totem out on the board? Suddenly the Divine Shield wouldn't really be all that good because they could just run the totem in, pop the Divine Shield, and still use the Jade Lightning to kill your minion. In that scenario, maybe you'd be better off with can't be targeted by hero powers or spells. It certainly seems worse than Divine Shield on average, but then they'd have to, you know, running the 1/1 in wouldn't actually accomplish anything. You'd just be left with a 5/3 minion that they still couldn't kill with a spell, and then you'd be able to attack in turn the following turn. So, you know, that's an example right there where one is significantly better than the other. Maybe you're playing a deck that just doesn't have a lot of removal spells. Or maybe you're playing a priest that has already used both Shadow Word Deaths, and you know there's just no way for them to kill this minion on the board. So you say, hey, why not give it Wind Fury? Let's just make this a ridiculous threat that can do 10 damage. And then you play something like Savage Roar, and suddenly you've got a 14 damage minion out on the board next turn, which maybe gives you lethal and kills the opponent. That could be a cool scenario. So, you know, Taunt is probably going to be the least powerful on average, but there are those scenarios where you need a Taunt minion to survive, so you have to give it Taunt because it's going to keep you alive, or maybe force a really bad trade or protect a really high value minion. So you can see how all these, in the right settings, as long as you're an aware player who's thinking about the consequences, could give you a pretty substantial advantage as long as you pick correctly. Now, of course, there is some downside. There's RNG involved. You might get Taunt, +3 attack, and stealth, and none of those are what you need. You really needed a Death Rattle. You really needed Wind Fury. Who knows, right? But there are options here that could fail. So there is some inherent risk and downside, but at the very least, you're going to get to pick the least worst of the three options, right? So you can probably get something that's halfway decent most of the time. You know, you'll always hope that there's that Divine Shield or Death Rattle in there, I suspect. But it's still an interesting idea. As far as this specific card is concerned, I don't think this is going to change the game or anything. I think it's fine. We'll have to see how Druid looks and how Beast Druid looks in particular. This could be pretty good. But as a keyword, it has a lot of interesting applications, particularly the earlier in the game you go, because these kinds of effects, you know, a 10-mana card, adding Divine Shield to it is maybe like a 1-mana value increase, which is like 10%, right? So if you got a 10-mana card and you make it worth 1 mana extra, that's sort of a 10% increase. But if you take a 2-mana card and give it Divine Shield, if that's still 1 mana of value, that's suddenly increasing that card's value by 50%. So you could see how these kinds of effects can become more substantial in the early game, particularly with things like Death Rattles, right? Like a 1-mana 1/1 that summoned 2 1/1 Death Rattles would be insane. Whereas a 10-mana 10/10 that summoned 2 1/1 Death Rattles wouldn't really be all that impactful or all that significantly different, because most of the stats would be bundled in the first half of the card's cost. So you can see how as mana costs skew earlier, each of these effects feels a little bit stronger in relation to the original card. So that said, I think most of these will fall in the mid-range, probably like the 3 to 7 mana range. But if there are any that are like 1, 2, or 3 mana cards that, you know, have otherwise a solid minion attached, they could be really, really good. So we'll have to see how Adapt unfolds as the rest of the set is revealed. But that's going to wrap it up for me and this review. So as far as these cards are concerned, Awaken the Makers is a strong card that will definitely be played. Pyros is a pretty weak card that won't be played. Volcano is an average card that might see play, and Verdant Longneck is an average card that might see play. So, I'm curious what you guys think about these first 4 cards. Particularly, I'm curious what you think about the new mechanics that were introduced here in the first first reveals for Journey to Un'Goro. Let me know what you think. Let me know what's good, what's bad. Let me know if I got it right or if I got it all wrong. And until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.